Never happen again. It was really Camelot. It was what Jackie Kennedy tried to make the Kennedy administration into. It was King Arthur, except King Arthur would go to the local bar and hang out with the players. There was a love affair that I will never experience again in my life. And I'm not somebody 60 years later saying, oh, it was greater then. I don't believe in that. I mean, every era has their thing. But this was Thornton Wilder's our town. This was a place where not only these players, and it was still on the border in the South, and the African-American players, who they called then black players, went to their part of town, and the white players went to their part of town. But any one of the black players, if they wanted to at the time, could have come in and been perfectly safe because Lenny Moore was a god. Jim Parker was a god. Jim Parker had the biggest liquor store in town. Lenny Moore had a place. Lenny Moore was into jazz. He knew all the jazz greats, and he was a great musician. And these people, they didn't have agents. They didn't put on the Grunk Beach parties. They didn't go on Instagram and say, where am I going to play next? They would, and they had no, every player now is protected by, the bouncers at the place, or they have their own private, security system. You could walk in anywhere. There was one famous place that I claim in my book, President of the Creation, was the greatest bar in America. It was called Sweeney's in Baltimore. Sinatra, Sammy Goldstein, my buddy who ended up in the trunk of a car, literally, Mickey Mantle, everybody. I met Tommy Heinsohn there, the Celtics legend. Everybody came in this bar, and they went to the back bar called Sweeney's. If you walked in there, and it was used, they have a big band every night. In fact, the person I was mentioning earlier, Al Madman Bates, who was in the movie Diner, Barry Levinson's Ode and Love of Baltimore, which really captured what it was. And so you could go into a bar anywhere. And remember, a lot of these players preceding 1960, they had second jobs. They were steel workers. They were dock wallopers. The greatest names in pro football history were there working with the blue-collar Baltimore. They loved them. Can you imagine walking in, you're John Unitas, and everywhere we went in the country, you go into an airport, whether it was Clark Gable or wherever it was, they'd all want to go over and meet Johnny U, the $7 a week guy from the Bloomfield Rams. And you're saying, forget Tom Brady, which is a great story. This is the greatest story maybe in the history of sports. Playing for essentially nothing, and the next thing you know, considered the greatest quarterback of his time and one of the two greatest I've ever seen. He'd be in having a beer with somebody. Gino would be in some places. You had Gussie's Downbeat, which I talk about in my book, which was half gamblers, some prostitutes, a mixture of everything. Mm-hmm. But nobody ever said to the players, tell me about the game, we want to bet on it. It was just a great mixture of humanity. And you could go into any one of these places and sit and drink and talk to the public. And therefore, imagine the bond. Today, you can't get near practice. You might be lucky if you see Brady at his mansion. Some of the other players have their hangout. But Baltimore was their home, and they went in there. And even to save money, some of the players would have apartments, families together. So this whole atmosphere was something you'll never recreate again.
You had a pretty colorful owner of the Baltimore Colts, Carol Rosenblum. Give us a little idea on his personality and also how he treated you and how you moved up the rank from, ticket sales to taking care of some of his personal business.
Too much of his personal business. First of all, he was a perfect owner for that bigger than life, friendly with Joe Kennedy. He had a plane that I think he named it Caroline 2, that he would, after the two world championships in a row, 58 and 59, in the springtime, he would load his plane up with Gino, Unitas, maybe Big Daddy, Lenny Moore, and he'd fly him to Hyannis. And because the Kennedys were known for the great touch football games. And so they would play in the touch football games with the Kennedys. I remember the story. I think it was Unitas or one of them told me the story, and I think I put it in my book.
I'm sorry, this is Caroline too. This is JFK's campaign plane.
No, Rosenblum bought his own plane to mimic the
Oh,
Caroline.
the Kennedy. Okay, I'm sorry.
He had his own private plane. I used to go on scouting trips when I couldn't get a commercial flight.
Oh,
I'd
okay.
call him, say, Mr. Rosenblum, can I use your plane? Sure, kid, go down and see something. I'd be on the plane flying to West Virginia or someplace I couldn't get into.
So I'm sorry. So basically, you're talking about this, and he takes some of these co-players
Down to play touch football. I mean, that's how big it was. And there was one day, I think it was Bobby Kennedy, who always thought he was the quarterback of everything. And so I think it was Gino was there, maybe Lenny was there, some of the other players, but Unitas was there. And people are never sure to this day whether Bobby knew who Unitas was or not. Bobby, in some ways, Teddy was the big pro football fan.
Mm-hmm.
And the president was to a degree. But so they're in the huddle. And Bobby says to Unitas, look, I want you over there, and I want you to go run down and run an in pattern. And the players to this day weren't really sure whether he knew who Unitas was or he just wanted to tell them, I'm the boss. So that would happen over a period of 2 years. The plane was always down at the Kennedy compound with the players. And that's how close Rosenblum was to Joe Kennedy and to the president. So, I mean, there would be times where I'd be working in the ticket office where I first started off, and Rosenblum would call and say, Uppy, I want you to get 10 pair of sneakers, 5 Colt footballs, jerseys and everything else, put it in the Colt wagon. We had a Colt station wagon with a big horseshoe on it. And he said, I want you to drive it over the White House. They'll let you right in through the gates, take it right into the White House, which I did. I mean, I said, why the hell should I ever want to leave this life? Take it in, and I said, well, what's this for, Mr. Rosenblum? And he said, we're having a big touch football game on Friday night right in front of the White House. And he said, we've got both sides, the people who work there and the president and everybody else. This was a common occasion. That's the type of power that he had. And he will always be dogged, and the reason I don't think he'll be in the Hall of Fame, should be, for what he put together, was a suspicion of gambling. It was always there. We thought he was gambling. Some people thought my father had to get in the middle of it as commissioner, that he instructed Unitas to throw a sideline pass. It could have been intercepted instead of taking it right in for the winning score. And there are many other things. There are real characters in his life that nobody was ever really sure of who he was in with. Their story of murders, there was everything. But this person, and I think he's the only person, as well as I know him, that I went in and asked him for a raise one day, and he actually cut my salary, and I thanked him on going out the door. That's like going to see The Godfather. And so he knew everybody. He was an ex-player in college. He understood football. He put all of his players in business. I mean, Gino Marchetti and Al Amici became multimillionaires when you were in Philadelphia. They had AG Foods and they had Geno's and everything else like that. He put Unitas in bowling alleys. He would say to a player, you come to me with the proposal. I'll have my financial people look at it, and if it looks good, I'll lend you the money.